Welcome back, everybody. So the Fabulous Beast 8K is finally here. So to begin with, if you're wondering what is Fabulous Beast, so apparently it's some kind of Chinese show or anime in China that's pretty popular, because this is a Chinese mouse after all. And so WLMouse had a collaboration with them, and as you can see, I chose the black and white colorway. I think it's the most attractive one out of all the other ones that are available. And on the M1 and M2, you can see there's a fox. There's also a paw print on the scroll wheel. On the back here, if you see, there's a paw print as well. And the battery, it also says Fabulous Beast with their logo on there. Externally, I would say that's the main difference. Also, the switches are now silver colored for this colorway in particular. So that's the main difference between this and the OG beastx externally, but there are some internal differences that I'll get to in a second here. So to begin with, I do want to discuss the specs. So internally, nothing's changed much with this compared to the OG beastx. It still uses a Pixar 3395 sensor and the Nordic 52840 MCU. However, the M1 and M2 switches have changed. They're no longer Omron opticals. They opted to switch to Nihil mechanical switches. Now, the reason WLMouse did this is to save on battery life. Omron opticals, or any optical switch for that matter, tends to drain battery more than a mechanical switch does. Now, as far as the buttons go, the side buttons still remain unchanged. They're still using Omron switches for the side buttons. And overall, I would say they still have the same tactile feeling as the OG beastx. So on that front, nothing's changed. With regards to pre and post travel, I would say it varies from unit to unit. So this unit in particular, this is the new one that I have. The pre-travel is moderate, I would say, and post-travel is also moderate. It's not that bad. It's very tactile, so overall it's a pretty decent sized button. Now, if you bring up the OG beastx, I would say it's very similar to the new one. This one's obviously older, so I've got a lot more use out of it. So there's a little bit more post-travel with the older beastx than there is a new one. But I imagine after a lot of use, this will end up being the same as this one. The shape of the M1 and M2 buttons hasn't changed either since the OG beastx. They're concave, and they tend to flare towards the middle. That's all very similar to the Razer Viper V3 Pro and the Tiger from Final Mouse. They all have that same concave shape for their buttons, and they kind of flare towards the middle. So yeah, nothing's changed there. You know, Sora calls those the comfort grooves, but essentially that's what they are. They're meant like if you hold your finger like this, in this case with a beastx, it's just meant to kind of contour your fingers. I don't really find a huge use out of it, but because I use fingertip and claw. But again, if you do stretch your fingers out, then it may be useful to you. So the M1 and M2 buttons, they both have a little bit of pre and post travel. I would say just a moderate amount once you press it down. As you can see here, when I press on it, there's a little bit of pre-travel. Then once I finish the click, there's a bit of post-travel as well. But I think any mouse that's worth its salt should have a little bit of pre and post-travel, because if it's instantaneous like that, then it kind of messes up your timing, I think. Now, obviously, having too much pre and post travel is not good either, but I think just having a small amount of it's totally fine, and these buttons feel good overall. As far as build quality goes, you know, nothing's really changed between this and the OG beastx. I can squeeze on this. There's no real creaking or flex anywhere. So yeah, there's nothing that's changed between this and OG beastx, externally anyway. Internally, something did change, and I do want to talk about this as a point of caution for you guys that like to open your mice. So if you see here in my hand, this is the ribbon cable that connects the side button PCB to the main board. And this thing is tiny, right? So when you open this is gonna, most likely this will rip on you like it did me. And I don't use force when I open my devices. I didn't even notice that this was ripped until I put the mouse back together. And then I saw that the side buttons were no longer functioning. So I transplanted the cable from the OG beastx to the new one. And I noticed when I was doing that is the OG beastx cable, data cable, if you look on your screen, I got a picture of it, was longer than the one that they provided with the Fenz. I don't know why WLMouse opted to supply a smaller cable, especially because they know people tend to open these mice up anyway, so that's a strange thing for them to do. But anyhow, if you do rip it, you can probably ask them for replacement, but keep in mind, opening the mouse technically voids a warranty, so I've technically voided my warranty already. So I went on Amazon, I just bought a replacement cable so I can put it in my OG beastx, but just be mindful of that. But apart from that, yeah, build quality is exactly the same. There's no differences between both of them. Now, as far as the shape and feel goes, nothing's changed between this and the OG beastx. You know, the dimensions are still the same, the design's still the same. So you're going to primarily use it as a claw grip or a fingertip grip. Nothing's going to change on that end. So even if you have smaller hands, even down to, I want to say 17 by 8, you're still going to pretty much claw this or fingertip it. You're not going to palm this mouse. It's a fairly small mouse, especially compared to some of my other bigger ones. Like, for example, you know, here's the Tiger. It may not look much bigger on camera, but in person, they're noticeably different grip wise. This one hits your palm in the back a lot more than this one does. So that's why I say, if you're going to be using this mouse, you're primarily going to stick to fingertip or claw. So as I mentioned in my previous review with the OG beastx, I still grip this the exact same way. So I'll put my thumb in the slit here on the side. I'll put my other third finger over here on the slit, put my 2 fingers up here, and that'll give me pretty good control when I'm moving the mouse around. So I can swipe it, you know, I can flick, I can do everything else, and I can primarily stick to wrist movement rather than arm because of the size of this mouse. Now compared to, like, say for example, the Tiger, you know, because this mouse is longer and it's just bigger overall, I still grip it the same way, but I have less maneuverability in my palm. So I have to use arm movement with this one more than I do the beastx. It's just nature of the size and the way you grip them is you're going to be forced to use, not forced, but you're gonna tend to use wrist movement more often than you would a bigger mouse like this. So one difference I noted between the OG beastx and the new Fabulous Beast one is the coating is different. The Fabulous Beast one has a more textured coating. It's not like the Razer V3 Pro. That's a totally different kind of rubbery feeling. This is not rubbery. This is more of a rough texture. It doesn't feel bad. It's actually pretty good. It's a little chalky feeling if I had to describe it more accurately. And it's on the sides as well and on the M1 and M2 buttons. So it allows you to grip it a little bit more than the OG beastx. This is smoother and more metallic feeling. But overall, it's not a huge difference. You'll be able to grip these almost exactly the same. You'll get a little bit more grip out, I think, out of this one because of the texturing. So the biggest difference between the OG beastx and the new Fabulous beastx is the switches. So these are knee-heel mechanicals versus Omron opticals. One thing I did notice during use is it takes more force of actuation for M1 and M2 with the new mouse than it does the older one. I feel like the old Omrons are more spammable and they take less actuation force, but it's not a huge difference. So you're not gonna feel a big difference between this and the new one. It's just, like I said, it's just less spammable. And I would say the noise that it makes is a little bit different compared to the old one. These are more silent, the Omrons are, compared to the new knee heels. And I feel like when I click on these, there's more of a metallic feel compared to this one. This one is just silent and it's more switchy sounding, if that makes sense. This one has more of a metallic clink to it. As far as the tactile feeling goes, I mean, as a matter of personal preference, I like the Omrons better than the knee heel mechanical switches. I just think they feel better in hand. They're easier to spam. But if you have a heavy trigger finger, then you're probably going to like these better because they do take more force of actuation. And because of that, you know, it depends on how you grip a mouse and how much force you apply to your M1 and M2 buttons. So it all comes down to preference, you know. So if you want a heavier click feel, then obviously this one's better. If you like something lighter, then obviously the OG beastx with the Omrons are better. Unfortunately, you cannot get a choice between the two anymore with the medium beastx. The large beastx or the beastx max will give you a choice. You can select between the Omron opticals or the knee heel switches for the beastx max. And you know, if you're a do-it-yourself type of guy, then later on, if you get bored, you can always, you know, solder those off and put the mechanicals on or put Omrons on or whatever you want to do with the beastx max. I don't think that's the case with this one, unfortunately. So if you're getting mechanicals, you're kind of stuck with those. Another key difference between these is the scroll wheel. Now, as I mentioned, this obviously has a pod design because it's a collaboration unit. This does not. But one huge difference is the fact that this has a rubber wheel and this was purely plastic. Another key difference is just the way they sound when you move them. The older beastx has a more grindy noise to it and a feels more grindy, and you can hear it too. This definitely has a more grindy sound to it, whereas this one is almost silent, but you can feel each actuation step as you move your mouse. One other difference I noticed between the scroll wheels is the new one sits a little bit lower than the old one. I'll bring it up to the camera. Maybe you can see the difference here. It's very slight, but in person it is more noticeable. So this mouse comes with dot skates, so make sure you guys remove the adhesive when you do get it. There's a thin film on here, because if you don't, it's not going to feel good when you use it. But as far as use goes, you know, they glide pretty well. I have a Pat Smith Crucible pad, so you know, it's a low friction pad, and this mouse tends to work pretty well on it. At least these skates do. But I can press down with force, and it doesn't grind on here. Now, if you have a softer pad, it might. And if you do have a softer pad, I'd probably say take these off, and then you could use either the ones that come with this. You know, you got large ones, and then you got the medium-sized ones that you can switch to, and then you also have these grips that you have on here that you can put on here if you don't like, you know, the slits on here. Which personally, I think the slits are just fine, but if you don't, then you have a choice of 2 grips that you can use as well. But yeah, if you don't like these skates, then you can opt for SL12 Tiger Ice V2s. That's what I used to put on my OG beastx, and I found that they work extremely well with these. So if you are looking for aftermarkets, I would say switch to those, especially if you have a softer pad. Like I used to use an Artisan pad before this one, and I used the SL12 Tiger Ice V2s on those, and I found that even when I pushed down, it didn't grind on the pad, and it felt extremely good. So those will work well with this one, like a small, speed pad like this that's thin, or a thicker, a thicker pad that has more friction to it. So either way, it'll work. These dot skates are more optimal for a thinner pad like this one though. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a new software. Now clearly, as you can see, it's changed compared to the old one. This one in particular, because it's a collaboration unit, it has a collaboration software. You can see, the Fabulous Beast in the background. And by default, what I found is when I install the software, it comes in Chinese. So just go ahead and click up here, switch to English when you do get it, and then click on home. And then you just click on the mouse and it'll load it up. So one key difference you'll notice now right off the bat is this has 8,000 pulling rate. Also, you can switch between 3 different profiles. So you can do from 125 to 8,000 as far as the pulling rate goes. DPI steps, you can go from 1 to 6. Also, I've got 3 set up on mine. 1600 is by default. Also, you can set your debounce time because these are mechanical switches now, so you can go all the way up to 15. I keep mine at 0, and I've noticed as far as the debounce goes, I don't get any slam clicks on this. Like, so I'm dropping this up and down right now. It's not slam clicking on the desktop whatsoever. So you can leave this on debounce 0. I know there's other mice that don't have as good of a firmware where it will actually double click if you slam click it. This does not. So on that front, you guys should be okay. Some other features that carried over from the old one are angle snap, motion sync, ripple control, and high speed mode. In my personal testing, I found no real benefit with high speed mode, so I'd probably just keep that off. Lift off distance is still unchanged. You can switch between 1 and 2. So another thing you can do with this is you can custom set your keybind. So for example, I want to set number 1 up here. I'll click down here for left button, and I can assign it a squill, multimedia, shortcut, whatever you want, DPI lock, DPI plus, minus, disable, macro, or a single key combination. So you can do that with all of these. Next thing is you can set a macro. So, whatever macro you want to set up, you can set up here. You can have a delay. You can type in your delay here, the data type, keyboard to mouse, and you can basically hit that and it starts recording it. There's also lighting for the dongle itself. So you can select a different color for the dongle. So for example, right now it's on green. If I want to make it red, I can switch to red. If I want to make it purple or pink, yellow. So whatever color I want. You can also set the brightness for it. You can also make it breathing if you want. So it'll kind of switch colors and it'll have like a breathing mode. It'll fade in and out. Let's see. I'll make it to about a 4 setting. And then you should see it's breathing in and out. Now compared to the old one, which was a Rubik's Cube, obviously this one is much smaller footprint wise. And I think most people will like that because, desktop space is limited. But if you're the type of person that enjoyed something just different, then this was different. I mean, it was completely different compared to everything else on the market. I personally liked it. I don't mind either one. I do like the smaller footprint of the new one, but this one was configurable. It had LEDs all around it. It kind of reminded me of a Borg cube. If you watch Star Trek, you can make it all green and have a breathing effect to it. You could set up your custom GIFs on here or your own personal images, whatever you wanted, a logo. It also gave you like your DPI battery, DPI loadout, your battery percentages. So it was a useful little device. I kind of wish, for the new one, they would have made it a little bit bigger and perhaps had like an LED on here that had the values that this one did. I found that pretty useful, especially when I was using the mouse. I just wanted to glance over and see what my battery was and what my current DPI was and such. So using XLAT, I found that this mouse now is faster than every other mouse that I've tested, including the final mouse, which was the reigning champ. So at 1K, it has 0.335 milliseconds click latency. At 8K, it has 0.338. At 2K, it has 0.339. And at 4K, it has 0.341 milliseconds click latency. So yeah, it is a new champ as far as click latency goes. It finally dethroned the final mouse. So I guess it's expected. It's a newer mouse, newer firmware. But so far, it's looking good for this mouse. Now, as far as motion latency goes, this is a little bit faster than my control unit at minus 0.1 milliseconds. It's exactly the same as the OG beastx, so nothing's changed on that front. It's still a little bit slower than the ULX Tiger, and again, a little bit slower than Super Light 2. In practice, you're never going to see any difference between any of these mice when you're using them. So as far as wireless performance goes, this thing is stellar. I'm not seeing any off-period pulls at all. And another point of good news is the frequency versus time. Pulling stability is perfect. I'm not seeing any issues at all in 1K. Now, compared, if you saw my old review compared to the OG beastx, and you look at your screen, I have the graph up, that was terrible. And that's the reason WLMouse switched to a new provider, because they were not getting firmware updates to fix that. And so they're left with no choice but to make the new revision, the beastx. Unfortunately, the new firmware provider delivered in spades. And so yeah, this one no longer has any wireless issues that the old one did. As far as gaming performance goes, it's like putting on an old glove. This and the OG beastx are exactly the same size-wise and material-wise, so there's no difference there. I would say the biggest difference I noticed between this and the OG one is because these are now mechanical switches that use more force of actuation. If I was playing, for example, Finals, or if I was playing Warzone and I had to use a gun that required manual firing, for example, in the Finals I was using the FAMAS, I had to press down on the button several times. And because this has a higher force of actuation, I was able to spam it less than I could with the OG beastx. So that's the biggest difference that I noticed between the two mice. Other than that, I think gaming performance-wise, sensor tracking was perfect. I didn't get any spinouts. You know, I didn't lose any tracking. So as far as that goes, wireless performance, it was perfect. I had no issues with it at all. So as I mentioned in my wireless testing, they cleared up any type of issues that I had prior with my old beastx, which I didn't have too many anyway. Despite what the graph showed. But yeah, this one has been stellar. I've had no problems with it at all. Now, as far as battery life goes, I charged this up to 100% at 4K, and I was able to get about 4 days out of it. Now, compared to the OG beastx, I think I was lucky to get maybe 2 days out of that. And I use the mouse typically for about 3 hours a day or so. So yeah, they did improve it with this mouse. The firmware is, I think, the big reason why it's better. And obviously because it uses mechanical switches, these tend to use less battery power than Omron opticals do. So what do I give this mouse? Well, WLMouse cleared up any issues that the OG beastx had. You know, they had to sacrifice the Omron opticals for mechanical switches to lengthen the battery life. And because they have a new firmware provider, I think they're squeezing out a little bit more battery life because of that as well, despite the internal hardware being the same. One thing that I don't like about this new mouse compared to the old one are the switches. I'm not a fan of the knee-heel mechanical switches, and the reason is because they require more actuation force. Again, this is personal preference. You may like these newer ones better than the Omron opticals. For me, the Omron opticals are more spammy, and because of that fact, you know, if I was using a gun, say in Finals, and I was using the FAMAS and I wanted to spam it really quickly, I could do it better with the Omron opticals and more consistently than I can these. So if you have a heavy trigger finger, then you'll probably like the new one better, because it does require a little bit more force of actuation compared to the Omron opticals. Again, but that's a personal preference. But the scroll wheel's improved. You know, the magnesium alloy is still the same. The build quality is still top notch. So yeah, WLMouse did a great job. And the biggest thing is they cleared up the wireless performance. So overall, I give this thing a 9.5 out of 10. So if you guys do decide to buy this mouse, you can use my affiliate code, which is WLBeastx. It's on the screen. You'll get 2% off the price, and any proceeds from the sales I use towards purchasing new mice for this channel. So yeah, you'll be supporting the channel and you'll get a discount as well. All right, so that wraps up my review for the WLMouse Fabulous Beast Edition. Thank you guys again for joining me. If you have any feedback or questions, go ahead and leave it in the comment section. I'll get to those as soon as I can. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care.